Stay tuned for some outtakes. Welcome to Pitch It To Me Podcast, a show about the subjective past, present, and potential future of Flesh and Blood design. Today's episode will be all about Degeneracy, specifically the trading card game kind. Sorry, anime body pillow collectors, we'll get you next time. On Red Pitch, Joel will take us through the most broken, meta-breaking decks in the game's history. On Yellow Pitch, Clark will visit the bottom feeder Degenerate decks. And on Blue Pitch, Fuzzy will bring it all together with an abstract discussion on what it means to truly be degenerate. You can find us across all socials, such as TikTok and Instagram, at Pitch It To Me Podcast.
I'm Clark.
I'm Fuzzy.
And I'm Joel.
Hi, everybody.
Sigils.
Sigils.
Oh, sorry, Clark.
Yeah, we this last week when we're recording, we've seen like a bunch of sigils appear. Mm-hmm. So I already lost one of my points in pitch and predictions when I said they'd be all tokens. I mean, maybe they'll still be tokens, but like it looks like they're all just different cards across the different set.
You're really hoping for a half point here, Fuzz.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty nice, though. I really like the sigil designs. One thing I mentioned on our Twitter is that many of the wizard ones are all instants. Mm-hmm. So it helps provide a little bit more instant speed effects in wizards without like having something like the Kano ability. And also with Auxilio, he kind of has to run the sigils for his staff. But that means he's running all these instants and icky non-blocks. But he can discard them to draw blocking cards if he needs to.
You know, it's so funny. Like, it certainly seems like he has to run the sigils. But in Constructed, like, his ability just costs the same as Kano's default staff, Crucible of Aethertide. So, like, I'm sure paying 1 to amp your cards is probably, like, fine for Auxilio.
Maybe. We'll definitely have to see.
I also love how one of the sigils actually just gives the same effect as Kano Hero ability, the sigil of temporal manipulation, where like when it leaves the arena, banish the top card of your deck. If it's a non-attack action card, you may play it this turn as though it were an instant. Mm-hmm. I'm like, hell yeah, these are the instant speed effects that I want Wizard to have access to, and their hero abilities like were a little bit absent of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely really worried about how Auxilio was going to like balance or be balanced, having like a bunch of abilities to discard a card and draw a card. But if it's like these auras that he just wants to get rid of to get a singular blocking card or maybe something that does damage, it seems like it's going to be a bit clunkier than we originally thought. I imagine it would be hard for them to abuse Waning Moon, which is still legal in Classic Constructed. That's what I was really worried about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But then you can just like drop a sigil and then like pay Waning Moon, and then the sigil like hopefully gives you like a card's value back.
Yeah. I know a lot of people are scared of Temporal and the Arknight one, the Sigil of the Arknight. Yeah. Both of those people seem to be a little scared of because like it's just raw card advantage that you can bank, right? Spend a card on this turn, get a card on my next turn. But I don't know. I don't think it'll be that scary per se. You know, and Viscerai, he's typically running a 50-50 split. So like if you think it's kind of a coin flip on whether or not he hits off of it, it's not a very scary card at all.
Yeah, a lot of these sigils seem like the agility, might, and vigor tokens in the sense that it gets you really good value, but only for the next turn. So you have to like kind of cash it in right there. And then it seems like there's a little bit of variance with the Arknight one at least.
Mm-hmm.
What are we talking about, guys?
This episode is about Degeneracy in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah. So we were chatting together and like Degenerate and Degeneracy is this buzzword that's thrown around a lot in trading card games and just online spaces in general. But like, what exactly does it mean for something to be degenerate? Like, I think we heard Zen is a degenerate deck and we were like, is he though? And we started talking about it. And at a certain point, someone went, whoa. We gotta do an episode. I'm like, we're losing too much good content here.
And it feels like a good time to make this episode too, because I think people are complaining about like Zen being so degenerate that they don't want to play the game that much, especially because I think he's so much stronger than a lot of other meta heroes. Like, people are complaining about it being a bad meta, so let's talk about why that might be, you know?
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and jump into it. Joel's going to lead us off on Red Pitch. Joel, take it away.
Sure. So obviously, when you talk about Degeneracy, you're mainly looking at the top meta decks, the decks that have either LL'd or been at the top for so long, it's hard not to include them in the conversation. So I want to first start off with some hyper aggro decks, because as we've talked about in this podcast time and time again, aggro is usually pushing the boundaries right out of a set release to see how much damage they can do and close games out the quickest. These are usually the problem heroes that other decks are trying to adapt to as the meta progresses. And I've labeled 4 so far, but feel free to shout any out that. And no, Clark, Kano does not count as aggro in this instance. So I have listed Zen, Lexi, Briar, pre-nerf, and Chain pre-nerf. Well, actually pre and post-nerf, because he was pretty busted. But I think those 4 heroes, I think, are just objectively some of the strongest aggro heroes we've ever seen. And I want to talk a little bit about each one. And Zen, I think, is referred to as Degenerate largely because he doesn't have any like large hurdles to jump through in terms of like a top control deck to kind of overwhelm. He's just good. And he doesn't have a lot of like obstacles to get through to be at the top of the meta or be in the top 8 of a tournament. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah. Out of these 4 heroes that you've named, Zen definitely feels a little bit like the odd man out. Like, I think we've all seen the degenerate turns. And actually, another thing that brought us to this episode was very specifically in the banned and restricted announcement where they banned yellow and blue bonds of ancestry, Brian Go used the word degenerate. Like, he specifically said that these multiple double and triple bonds turns are degenerate, and that is the degeneracy in Zen. But then they banned those cards. So, like, is he still degenerate?
That's an interesting point. I think I disagree with you a little bit that Zen doesn't belong on this list. I just think that Zen is about as dominant now as Lexi was, even in her heyday. Because there were still decks like Dromai that were able to put up a really good fight against Lexi, that felt decent against Lexi, and thus were able to put themselves near the top of the tier list. And I think Nu kind of fills that spot now.
Yeah.
I think Nu is just as strong as Dromai was during Lexi meta. And that's part of what makes me feel, and like, it's that part of the reason that Nu is so strong is literally that she beats Zen, you know? Like, that's her claim to fame. You can be a good deck in the meta just by beating Zen. Just like in Lexi meta, you could be good just by beating Lexi. It's that.
And I'm glad
I'm
glad you brought that up about Lexi, because why I think Lexi is probably one of the most oppressive aggro decks is because she actually had on hits out of all the heroes that we're going to be talking about in the aggro section. And her counters counter the rest of the meta. Like, Nu doesn't stop a lot of other decks existing other than maybe Guardian.
Yeah.
But other than that, she's not a super big gatekeeper. But Dromai would basically farm everybody else that beat Lexi. Like, Azuri was probably 80, 90, 10 matchup into Lexi, but she'd never see her because she would be, you know, playing against all of the Dromais and sometimes Bravos too, like the full fatigue Bravos.
Yeah, it definitely changed people's perspective when they were getting gatekept, not by the best deck in format, but by the thing that was preying on the best deck in format.
Right, exactly. That's why I felt it was so unique. And even through all of that, Lexi was still just on a tear. So Lexi, for those of you who didn't get to play, she was an elemental ranger that was ice and lightning. In her early heydays, she was lightning and ice focused. And as she got more powerful cards than outsiders, she mostly abused Rain Razors and 3-of-a-kind turns to have really explosive 20 to 30 damage turns. And all of her attacks were arrows, which had really debilitating on hits. That's what made her so oppressive.
And I think Voltaire was probably the most key piece of that, because she could
100%.
load with her bow 2 arrows per turn and give them go again. So she could actually make use of lots of card draw that other rangers were not able to.
Yeah. Not to mention Codex essentially giving you sometimes a 3rd draw on a turn.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Then next up, I want to talk about Briar. I think her reign of terror was a little bit shorter and prolonged at the same time. She previously had a different text than she did when she LL'd, which said whenever you would hit with an attack action card, you create an embodiment of Earth token, and it was not once per turn. So if you played,
how long was this around for?
That's a good question. I think it was around for probably a few months before they eroded it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was. So it was short and long at the same time.
Wasn't it until like after Uprising?
Yeah, like I came in and they were still handing out eroded briars.
So that's the two full set releases.
Wow.
Oh, is it?
Because Tales of Aria and then Everfest was around and then Uprising was released. Like,
yeah, that makes sense. And so after she got nerfed, she also lost a key card in Ball Lightning, which was a multiplicative effect that basically whenever you deal damage with an elemental card, it deal that much +1, and it did not stop at once. So it would just get really crazy from there. And she was so strong that she was doing well even when Lexi was full ice control and was giving her like 3-4 frostbites a turn. Like, it was quite strong.
Yeah. Anthem on a head jab sounds bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Next is Chain, who we've already talked about a little bit, but I'll go into it again. Chain is a Shadow Rune Blade, and basically he had an action where he creates a Soul Shackle token, which gives something Go Again and banishes cards from the top for every time he's used that ability. So in the late game, he'd have access to 7-8 card hands, and there wasn't really any decks that could fatigue him or survive his onslaught past the 5th turn. Prism had ways to fatigue, but other than that, Chain was kind of just the best deck in the format, and we didn't have nearly as many tools as we do now to deal with aggro decks, and I don't even know if that would do much against him. He was that strong.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we've talked about some of the most oppressive aggro decks, I want to ask you guys, what makes an aggro deck and not just like a degenerate piece of shit that breaks the meta? Do you guys have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I think like if I'm playing aggro, I'm playing the deck that's looking to block the least, right? I think Lexi's probably the worst example of this out of this list because she was pretty comfortable with like blocking with 2 cards and then just throwing like 2 good arrows on a turn. But like Zen, Briar, Chain like are doing their best when they're like, there's no way you can match my damage. Even if you throw a little disruption, I can still completely overwhelm you. And that's what it feels like to be aggro.
I would say the moment that it tips, the moment that it sort of goes over from one side to the other is on consistency and how long they can maintain that. So that's actually one of the reasons why I think, again, Zen is kind of the oddball in this list, because Zen can't really sustain those massive damage turns.
Interesting.
Turn over turn. I think he probably has a higher ceiling in any given turn than some of these heroes. I would say Zen can deal like a 40+ damage combo turn, right? I think that definitely puts him above any singular turn Lexi could have. But what made Lexi more degenerate was the fact that it was happening 5 turns in a row. And after every single turn, after they threw 15+ damage with 3 on hits at you, then they're like pass with 2 cards arsenal. And you're like, how the fuck did you throw all that at me and you still have a full arsenal at the end of it?
No, 2 times more the arsenal of any other hero.
Yeah. So I think that's really where it starts to happen. And again, Chain, right? Chain has that idea of like, well, Chain can have some pretty good 4-card, 5-card hands. And then you just start adding the banishing to increasing his hand size. And all of a sudden it's like, for 5 to 6 turns, I can't stop this deck. It's always going to be dealing 15+ damage to me. And that is degenerate. No one can reasonably block that much damage turn over turn.
Yeah, well said. And I think the issue that LSS has to figure out is how to make aggro decks be aggressive without crossing that line that you just mentioned, because we still have to deal with control decks, and oftentimes the power levels of control decks and aggro decks don't meet, and I think they're still figuring out that balance. What do you guys look for in a control deck that LSS would print that can help prevent these aggressive decks like taking over the meta like they have before?
Well, I think the easy answer would be like disruption in the form of on hits. The weakness of an aggro deck is that they're not prepared to block, right? They're hoping that they don't have to block because their offense is so good that they can make up for their non-blocking. But if you give them a strategy where they have to block your attacks, otherwise they're going to lose, then they'll probably lose, right? Weakest Link is a really strong on-hit they printed recently, but Command and Conquer also kind of falls into this list. Probably Pummel as well, since aggro decks are less likely to run D-Reacts.
Yeah. I would say an example of where this was done a little bit more properly is like Katsu. If I throw a CNC at a Katsu, the Katsu will respect that. And I will either reduce their damage output by getting rid of a card in arsenal, or they will give me cards in hand to protect the card in arsenal. They're having to make a choice because I threw this disruption. Many of the decks, like Lexi, like Zen, hell, I'd even say like Chain, right? They didn't really concern themselves with disruption because the disruption didn't actually do enough to stop them from going over that 12 damage threshold.
Yeah. Cool. Well, now I want to go into the control decks, and spoiler alert, 2 of them are Prism and Dromai, which I consider control, and we've talked about them in great detail in a lot of our episodes, so I won't go into them too much. But the other 2 heroes that I think are really degenerate versions of control is Oldhim and Icelander. Oldhim, because he had access to Crown of Seeds, probably one of the most broken headpieces in the game, where you turn a card into a card plus some. And Icelander, who could play more cards per turn cycle with disruption and had like a 10 to 12 life kill threshold, where if you get below that, you're probably already dead, especially if the player knows what they're doing. And I think this is something I think about a lot, is what you mentioned, Clark, when you were talking about how Brian Go and James White were at PTLA talking about the 4-card versus 5-card argument. And would you mind giving a little bit of a synopsis of what that is?
Yes, the very brief synopsis of this is that the main reason why they don't like Sink Below and Fate Foreseen as cards is because they provide an overrate blocking value from the arsenal, so that a defending hero can now have 5 blocking cards versus an aggressor's 5 attacking cards.
Yeah, they would rather have a game where you only have 4 cards worth of defense because it will naturally lead to a conclusion. If you have just as many blocking cards at all times as they have attacking cards, the games can drag.
Remember this for later.
So the reason why I bring this up is because I think Prism, Dromai, and Oldhim all abuse this.
Certainly.
I think they all abuse this in a really bad way, specifically through like board state and how it conserves life, and also Oldhim having a lot of mana sinks for 1 card, so that he was never spending that 4th or 5th card he was blocking with, and over time he would just fatigue you like 9 times out of 10 if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
And Icelander, not so much. I think her problem was just like playing on both turns with disruption. And I think what it boils down to in terms of why I think hyper control is a problem in Flesh and Blood and how it gets degenerate is how the rest of the field is in terms of their access to in-engine disruption. And by this, I mean, like, how many natural poppers can you fit in your deck without it being too clunky? How much AB you have in your natural equipment suite without it being too clunky, and how much armor you have to deal with certain on hits from these opposing heroes and or things that accelerate your gameplay to get over these defenses.
Yeah, like KO kind of has some really good in-engine disruption in the form of his armor suite.
I'm really happy that you also mentioned poppers here. So often I will hear players complain about Prism and her heralds, and I'll ask, like, well, who are you playing? And they'll be like, Ninja. And I'm like, yeah, dude, you don't have any poppers. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they play 3, maybe, on a good day.
Yeah.
I've got my Command and Conquers, and that's about it.
No, I think I also mentioned during our Allies episode specifically what I think the issue with, like, Phantasm is and poppers, and, like, why I think illusionists get this rap for being a degenerate deck over other classes is primarily that LSS just gave them too many counterplay tools for what's supposed to be their bad matchups. They have too many ways of removing Phantasm, too many ways of having a game plan into heroes where they can just pop every single Phantasm attack you throw at them, right? The Illusionist never has to change. Everybody else does.
Right. Yeah, so I think it's really the combination of like how these heroes abuse the board state, their level of disruption, because even Oldham had, Winter's Wail for a little bit. And I think Prism and Dromai have some decent amounts of disruption, but it's largely the board state. And just the power of other decks. Like sometimes we just don't have the threat density in the aggressive decks to overcome. And then when the meta like self-corrects with a new set and there's this new aggressive deck, it kind of like either blows them out of the water, so much so that what was supposed to be the counter doesn't work anymore, or these hyper control heroes LL before they get the chance to like be the natural predator to the aggressive decks. So now that we talked about hyper aggro and hyper control, the only thing I want to mention left is my last section, which is just titled bullshit. And that's
No. It's not titled bullshit, Joel. It's titled bullshit.
Bullshit. Bolshevik, whatever that means. But yeah, I just think Starvo was in his own fucking realm. Like, he's a genuine design mistake. Everyone pretty much agrees so. I don't think I think there was like counterplay to him, but there was this weird like love rectangle of a meta during that time, and none of them really like did anything to Starvo, and he got the most living legend points of any hero in the game. I think there's just a whirlwind of bullshit that made him rise to living legend and his creation in general.
Yeah. It's interesting because I joined after this era, right? All of these heroes were pretty much gone by the time that I came in. And so when I heard people talk about it, they almost talked to, like, at first they talked about it very vitriolically. Like, I hated this meta. This meta was garbage. I had to run this super broken deck that, like, it's fun, but, like, I felt bad playing it, But now the narrative is shifting. And now everyone's like, oh, man, remember when the meta used to be original Prism and Starvo and Lexi? They're just kicking their feet while laying, stomach down on the bed, just dreaming about the good times. And it's like, whoa. That was a Yu-Gi-Oh meta, dude. That was just who gets to do their broken bullshit first.
People are excited to like reminisce about these crazy times that they used to live in, or maybe never got to visit because they entered the game later, right? It's like the Living Legend format's getting like this new kickback, and people are excited to dip into it again.
And we're hearing great things about the Living Legend format. And you know what? I'm happy. I'm happy that the Living Legend format is there so that everyone who wants to nostalgically live out their fantasies of playing ALS on turn 0 and then every single Spectra aura and swinging for 20 with tiny little auras, they can do that. Don't fucking bring that into my games.
Yeah, miss me with that entire bullshit. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. All the, top meta decks that were degenerate in their heyday. Thanks for going down memory lane with me. But I think now it's time to go into our yellow pitch. Clark, what do you got for us?
Yeah. So when we were having our conversation about Degeneracy, we were talking about Zen and we were talking about these obvious top of the meta decks. And then I remember the moments that I hated playing Flesh and Blood the most. And Ben, I love you. But there was a moment where I was playing my KO deck against Ben's Fatigue Riptide, and I had 10 straight turns where I did not deal a single point of damage. Jesus. I had go again every single turn. I threw even evasive cards. I threw CNC. Doesn't matter. It does not matter. I did not deal damage for 10 turns, and I was miserable. I clutched out the game, but I didn't feel good about it. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in this pitch, right? Are these strategies that they're not winning the game. They're not at the top of the Pro Tour, but that doesn't make them any less degenerate. So let's get into one of them. And I'm going to start with the ones that I truly believe are degenerate. with rune chant stacking. That's right, Joel, I'm backing you up.
Let's go! We're so back.
Rune chant stacking is a degenerate strategy, and I'm actually really worried because it looks like Florian is going down this direction. Mm-hmm. So rune chant stacking was also, I think, like the first degenerate strategy we saw in Flesh and Blood. Is that fair to say?
It can't be.
Arcane Rising. Who was out in Arcane Rising that like we mentioned in the first pitch?
Well, this even spilled into like the.
But we didn't talk about Kano and Red Pitch, Fuzzy. We didn't talk about Kano and Red Pitch.
We didn't talk about Viscerai and Red Pitch.
That's why we're talking about him now. Sorry, Joel. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say, yeah, this was like leaking into Monarch because I remember Viscerai playing against Chain, and the Chain wasn't able to kill the Viscerai. So it was definitely like one of the very first truly degenerate decks where it was just doing his thing.
At one point, this was like the meta deck.
Mm-hmm. It was.
Yep.
This was the top deck at one point in time. It is an uninteractive gameplay loop focused on maximizing block value, so I never really take any damage. Any damage that you do deal to me, it's not going to matter because I'm just building towards a hand that will be so large, so inconceivably big chungus, that no hand or armor suite could conceivably prevent all of this damage. You could,
oh Lord, he coming.
You could break Balance of Justice and have 5 blues and Oasis Respite. It doesn't fucking matter. This is going to be 60 arcane damage at your face. I am a train barreling through your center of gravity. And you can't do anything about that. That's not fun. Now, I will say that over time, LSS has printed cards to deal with this strategy that would make it less degenerate. Because one of the main reasons why it was so bad back in its heyday was because there was no way of dealing with it. There were no Scour did not exist as a card. Ripple Away did not exist as a card. And in fact, the day that we are recording this episode, we just got seen another way of dealing with this strategy. That's right, LSS is printing cards to stop this from being a valid strategy to this day with Vaporized Shock, which will allow us to destroy an aura permanent with cost X less than or... What the fuck? This fucking ability. Jesus Christ, I should have read this before I went into this. I'm just going to read it straight.
Yeah.
Destroy an aura permanent with cost X or less and / or up to X aura tokens, comma, where X is the total arcane damage you've dealt to opposing heroes this turn. So if I deal a bunch of arcane damage, I can play this and destroy a bunch of your fucking tokens. Get fucked, Viscerai.
And part of everything that made it really strong back in the day is the Bloodsheath Skeleton comboing with Sonata Arcanics. Like, it was a really good combo that let you grab like 5 cards from my deck to my hand for free.
Yeah. Doubling up on that value that you essentially had just been letting build and build and build with no way of getting rid of it.
Yeah.
It's genuinely encouraging that LSS has been creating more, especially in engine too, ways of dealing with like what they recognize to be like oppressive and broken. And it makes me wonder, like, not that it matters really, but it makes me wonder like what the meta would have looked like all these years ago if we had any of these items or any of these cards during that time.
Definitely. Now the other strategy that I think is extremely degenerate, and that is just blocking. Just blocking. That's all they're going to do. They're just going to block. They'll attack. If you don't throw enough damage that they will fully block you, then they'll be like, whoa, I have a card left in my hand.
Arsenal it.
Swing for 4. Arsenal it, right? Like, there's no actual back and forth when it's just a one-way street with nothing happening. And do you remember when I said, listeners, in Red Pitch, remember this for later? This is the later.
it's funny because like as an aggro main, this is my dream, you know, because then I really get to test my aggro skills. Like, yeah, this is probably a bad matchup if they're literally just blocking me, but also like, how can I reliably, like, if I have all the tempo, push like extra damage over and like manage my break points? Because the tools are there, right? As a ninja main, especially, like if I just make sure I'm not swinging for 3, 6, and 3 or something like that, then I'll probably be able to get through their defenses at least a little bit. Hopefully I can get them chipped down enough over time. But yeah, like it's effective because you have 40 life. And if you're chipping just a couple damage each turn, it takes a long time to get through them.
Yeah. And I'm just going to say that like it's a very valid strategy. It takes a ton of skill to pull off. Like I think there's a lot of skill in knowing when to block and when to keep cards to throw them. And I think the players who best embody the strategy and get the best results don't actually just full block, right? They are noting when they are able to, when the conditions are right for them to flip and throw a little bit of damage back. Because ultimately, they win by being in a situation where they are forcing you to block, and then you truly can never get over the 12 damage threshold. But the reason why the strategy works so well, it's actually a weakness of the pitch system. Blue cards are necessary for aggro decks to maximize their damage and throw as many reds as possible in a turn, but you only get to run so many reds in your deck. Eventually, you'll be left with blues, and those blues won't deal the damage, and then the defending player will just have more and more opportunities to do what they need to do. I felt this really strongly in Viscerai, where like I would just see opponents go, oh, it's a Mordred turn? Okay. Like, it doesn't matter what's in my hand. I am full blocking this. Because at the end of the day, I don't need any of this to win. I need one blue card that costs 3 to swing hammer. That is my win condition. As long as I keep one blue card that costs 3, I win the game. Everything else is irrelevant. And that is Degenerate, in my opinion. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. Like, this is a strategy that I employed when I was grinding for Nats for my first Nat season. I played a lot of Oldhim, not like full fatigue Oldhim, but that was obviously a strategy that I employed. And while I had a lot of fun playing against like Dromai and like other Guardians and like some aggro decks, like it feels a little bad because you're also gatekeeping a lot of like these niche decks, much like I'm sure Prism and Dromai players felt. Like, it's a good deck, it's a good strategy, but you still feel a little bad when you just like absolutely crush somebody and the writing's on the wall and they're starting to realize that they can't kill you. It's like, I don't know, it just sucks up a lot of the fun and a lot of the trade cycles and the pitch stacking that make Flesh and Blood so fun.
As we're talking, I kind of thought of another way that Degenerate strategies form, but this is going to be an example from Draft. Surprise, surprise. I'm the Draft guy on the podcast, apparently.
I love the fact that you're bringing up Degenerate strategies in Limited, because they've existed.
Yeah. And there was one that was actually famous, even as a Degenerate strategy in Limited, because it was actually kind of strong and broke that Limited format, and that's Azuri Pile in Outsiders.
Oh my god.
Because just putting a bunch of cards in your deck, it almost doesn't even matter what they are. Hopefully they're 3 blocks, but just put a bunch of cards in your deck and block out. And Outsiders was a sort of lower power. It was, a lot of the power was in the on hits. So if you just block these arrows, then they're going to run out of arrows. And if you just block their attacks, they're going to run out of attacks. And the weapons are like little daggers that swing for 1. So if you're able to like return those daggers, they're not going to block them. If they throw their big attacks, you block them out. It just ended up winning because you have more cards. And it wasn't necessarily like what you would expect out of the format. And maybe we should have mentioned this in Red Pitch because it's a strong strategy, but I feel like it kind of belongs here in these like unconventional ways of playing the game.
Yeah. I would say that we really see that in how the metas this year have evolved. In both heavy hitters and Part the Misfail, I think they started as very synergy heavy, aggressively oriented, like, hey, I'm going to do my game plan and that's how I'm going to win the game. But as the draft meta developed, I noticed that block 3s just started becoming the best cards to grab. And like people were just passing chi constantly. It's like, chi, to use my hero ability, why would I do that when I can block for 3? Mm-hmm. And blocking for 3 just in both heavy hitters and in part the misfail became the premier ways to actually win the game. Just making sure that you have the block value to deal with your opponent's reds.
I think there's a lot more leeway there than you're kind of giving it credit for. Like I've been listening to On the Bobble, which is one of my favorite Flesh and Blood podcasts because it focuses on limited. And I never really heard them say like, ditch the chi, it's overrated. They're like, nope, chi is good. It helps you have a consistent deck, like across all heroes especially. So I think like you might be a little biased because I like to talk a lot about like, don't grab chi. You can have a really good draft deck without it. Blocking is better, you know. Yeah. But that's certainly a matter of opinion.
Sure. But I also just want to point to like the heavy hitters leaderboard. Who ended up topping that?
The one with the block 3s.
The one that has nothing but block 3s.
Yeah, I agree with Clark. Like I think especially in Outsiders, like that was like the worst limited environment I've ever played in. And that core strategy has just been leaking into other ones. Not because people are just saying just grab block 3s. Like I don't think it's like that simplified, but you can't deny the power of these block 3s, especially when they're like toning down the power of limited. Like in heavy hitters, we saw the first 2 blocks in Warrior, I think, like ever, and had a slew of them in Guardian as well. So like like the 3 blocks is like a true tenet of a limited that they're like continuing to make valuable in every set.
Yeah. All right. Now to round out the picture, I want to talk about the last bad degenerate strategy. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this one wholeheartedly, but I will provide my support and discuss it. And I want to start with all of us bowing our heads in prayer. Let us pray to our Lord and Savior, our Jesus. Hallowed be thy name. Thy dice rolls come, thy will be done, unfelt as it is online.
Can we do that?
Bitch, I just did.
Oh my god, that's fucking golden. Wow. I don't think I read that before this episode. Ooh, that's fucking funny.
Scabskins is ridiculous and degenerate. It just is.
Can you remind us what Scabskins do?
Sure. Roll a dice. If you get a 4, 5, or 6, you get an extra action point. If you roll a 2 or a 3, nothing happens. And on a 1, you lose your action point. You get nothing. Good day, sir.
No bitches, no money.
No bitches, no money. So it's so weird because like it's so bad to just roll Scabskins every single turn. But that is legitimately how Levia is trying to beat Zen right now. Is like just by having go again every single turn and rolling scabs when you don't have the natural go again.
I'd like to return back to that point, but I think I want to mention it after a little bit more discussion about Scabskins.
Sure. One of the main issues with it is that there is nothing you can do on the other side of the table to change the outcome of a completely random dice roll.
You know, it's funny. It's that's only 99% true because you can always run Gambler's Gloves and fuck over their dice roll.
You can. And you know what? Prism does run Gamblers because Prism is the ultimate hero on the losing end of why this is such a degenerate strategy.
Yeah.
The matchup in Brute v Prism just becomes you played a Spectra Aura. All right, let's see if RNGesus decided I win this game.
RNGesus take the wheel.
RNGesus take the
It's both players like giving up agency, but one of them has to give it up without consent.
Exactly. And I completely understand why that is so frustrating.
Yeah, and I think like my biggest problem is me on the other side. Well, I've been on both sides of the table. It's frustrating like being the one rolling the scabbies, but when you get scabbied upon, like if I'm playing perfectly for the whole game, and then at the end game you're like, you know what? I would like to win now, and you just start rolling every turn, no gamblers, no bitches, no fear, and you win.
Just unprotected raw dice rolling.
You raw dogged me for the win. Like I don't know, man.
It's there for you when agency has gotten you in the wrong place, right? The decisions that I've made along the way have caused me to be losing this game. Let's stop making decisions for ourselves and see if Scabbies can get out of jail free card. What if could I win this game if I had 2 action points every turn? Let's at least give myself a chance to see if I can.
Yeah.
I'm losing anyway. If you don't have anything to lose, you might as well roll Scabbies. I lose the game if I don't roll. I lose the game if I roll a 1. But if I roll that 6, miracles can happen, you know?
and I think that is exactly the correct way to roll Scab Skin Leathers. But some people disagree. Some people say like, hey, EV Scab Skins is actually really, really nice. And there's all these math calculations and people will flex
the Michael Hamilton approach.
Yeah, they'll flex their fucking master's degree in applied mathematics of like why you should technically roll Scab Skins every turn. And you know what? Fucking you do you, dude. Like, I'm not going to be the one who's going to sit here and tell you how to play the game. I think that it is a valid strategy, but a lot of people really don't like it. And I want to note that it completely removes agency on the other side of the table. And that can be frustrating.
I think there's a lot of tactical uses for Scab Skin Leathers, but it's only against like 1. It used to be 2, and now it's just 1 deck. And the aftermath of having this like random gambling piece of equipment, it just ruins a lot of other matchups where, especially if you're in a bad matchup, then you're like, okay, I'm going to roll every turn. And if I can't, I just lose. And then sometimes I lose anyways. That just feels like, even if like you set out to do this strategy, it's still going to feel bad when you eventually roll that 1. Only 1 in 36 brutes do well. Like that's the math.
Mm-hmm.
These are really good examples for your pitch, Clark. I've been really enjoying listening to these like random strategies that are just like off meta and weird.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you cooked for real.
All right. Well, I think I'm all cooked out. It's time for me to hang up my chef's hat.
Give me that toque.
And retire. Yeah. Here's the toque, baby. Fuzzy, take it away.
Okay, so for blue pitch, I want to talk about the definition of degeneracy and what actually makes a degenerate deck. And I have a model for how we can approach this word that makes it a little bit more concrete.
Ooh.
Joel, I saw Clark get excited because Clark loves his like models for understanding.
Oh God, I love my frameworks.
And I want to like be on the onset here that I tend to be really optimistic about trading cards and play styles. And I will continue that optimism in my definition here. And you might disagree because of how optimistic my opinion is. So I want to give you that teaser.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when we're thinking about degeneracy, you can perhaps look at it as a little bit more solid definition if you replace the word degenerate with perverted. And by perverted, I mean when you're taking something and putting it in a context that you're not used to. You're taking a game mechanic and you're using it in a way that it's not intended to be used. You are perverting that game mechanic. Perhaps you're perverting a meta by doing something the complete opposite of what's strong at the time. If you think of like Zen, he's kind of perverting the game by refusing to block, and he's perverting Art of War when he banishes a crouching tiger to draw 2 cards, right? That's part of what makes the deck so strong, is he's using this card and completely abusing the power of it. Same with Lexi. She abuses Voltaire and Codex of Frailty, 3 of a kind. Briar abused her hero ability and the Ball Lightning. And it's this perversion and abuse that makes a degenerate deck. Would you guys like kind of agree with that?
Yeah, I think the basic premise is something I agree with.
I would almost go wider, and it's not a perversion of specific cards or specific mechanics, because one, I think that's a little bit of like death of the author-y kind of conversation, right? Of like, this isn't what LSS intended. And then sometimes LSS comes out in a podcast and they'll be like, yeah, we fucked up there, bros. We did. We're sorry about that one.
But sometimes, like, I think in the case of Scab Skin Leathers, all those cases that we were talking about is not strictly a perversion of Scab Skin Leathers. I think LSS did intend for it to be a get out of jail free card sometimes. Yeah. But I do think that it can be abused, and that's where the degeneracy comes from. Perversion and abuse.
Sure. I like the abuse point. I would also say that I said at the beginning of my cut in here widening out that idea of perversion. I think the decks that tend to get labeled as degenerate pervert our idea of how Flesh and Blood should work.
Exactly.
And so often that is Guardian Warrior, baby, back and forth, trading blows, mid-range battle, armor to like cover breakpoints. And like that's the idea I think people have of like good classic Flesh and Blood. We heard it during Heavy Hitters all the time. Gotta return to Flesh and Blood, the good old days.
Yeah, like Bravo versus Dorinthia.
Where's this Clark been? I like this Clark.
Bravo versus Dorinthia is perhaps the least degenerate like deck matchup there is, right?
Except for my do nothing but block talk, but yeah.
Well, even then, like that would be a perversion of a normal game state. It would be an abusive mechanic. And I think part of that perversion can come from like, are you trying to win? If you're not trying to win, I think that would be a perversion of the game's intent. I think the game assumes that both players are sitting down to win.
Yeah. And straight up in the rule book, you are not allowed to like stall for time to a draw.
Sure.
If anyone believes that is happening, they can call a judge for that for that behavior and talk to them about the right way of going about it. Remember to talk to your judges, people. Don't listen to a fucking guy on a podcast.
So there's a part of me that really enjoys watching somebody pervert and abuse the game mechanics. And I think for me, a big part of that is the exploration. That if we want to enjoy this game, truly enjoy it, enjoy all parts of it, and soak it all in, you want to enjoy the good parts and the quote-unquote bad parts. That there's a lot of different ways to play the game, and the diversity of experience, I think, is something really core to trading card games. On one hand, we have like the social contract of like, we both sat down to win, we both sat down to attack and block, much more loosely, right? There are certain strategies that are more close to a fundamental Fab experience. And when you sit down to play Fab, you have an expectation for how it's going to go. And I can understand the frustration for having your expectations, what's the word, denied?
Yeah.
But I think on another level, if you shift your perspective, isn't it kind of exciting to have your expectations subverted? And to be given a fresh new experience that goes against what you would expect out of the game. That way you can perhaps learn as a player or really just experience something new.
Yeah. I think I'm going to return to blocking because like for me, that's such a sticking point in my head and how I interact with the game.
Yeah.
I was saying, even though I find the full blocking to be degenerate, I still find it incredibly clever and exciting when there are these really clever block turns and fatigue in games. I find those exciting and compelling and intellectually stimulating in the game.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of what you said, Clark, because number one, Flesh and Blood is a hyper competitive TCG and slowly being accessible for more casual players. But there's this like constant push and pull of like who to make happy. You know, it is hard to do both at once. And I think when you have like really cool lore, you have really cool heroes, and people are attracted to different things in a card game. And unfortunately, people are going to want to min-max things. They're going to want to do the most degenerate thing. And that's like what they get out of TCGs. And it's hard because you can only complain so much to the like LSS and say like, hey, this is like a problem, but it's like getting results. So the push and pull is what I find frustrating about Flesh and Blood. But I think at its core, I think people would just love the game because it's so competitive, and every deck I feel like could be degenerate in some way if they just like have the mindset of their core game plan switched a little bit. Sorry if that's word vomit or not.
Well, I like how you bring up the push and pull, because to me, like my like keyword buzzword for that is the conversation, right? How different decks get strong at different times. People adapt their deck lists in order to react to decks that are strong. If I'm playing Zen and I keep losing to Victor, what card inclusions can I make that can shift that matchup and refresh it a little bit? It's easy to get frustrated, like, damn, I always lose to this hero. And you probably still will, but if you make a couple changes, maybe you can shift the matchup a little bit and make it a little bit more interesting for yourself. And it's all a question of like, how am I going to sideboard? How am I going to adapt my strategy to certain heroes? Because the metagame is so wide. But when you look at these really big names in the meta, Lexi, I think, fits this a little less because I still never figured out like, how do I beat Lexi? But take Zen as an example. Right now, people are figuring out that Weakest Link is really good against Zen. Command and Conquer, really good against Zen. These on-hits with Disruption are really able to punish him because he runs lots of non-blocking cards. Part of his abusive strategy is running cards that literally do not block. It's a huge weakness for him. It's like over 10% of his deck, right? And you can punish that if you have the right card inclusions, and it might not like blow the matchup out of the water, but there are ways that you can tune your deck against that strategy because of how it works.
Yeah. Can I also try to make a big picture point here?
Sure.
I think one thing that, Joel, you were dancing around in your point, is agency, right? Like, I think the most degenerate decks make you feel like you have no agency, that there was nothing you could have done. You made all the right choices the entire way through, and it didn't matter anyway. I think this feels the worst when you look at like the most polarizing matchups. Illusionist, I think, is the biggest offender of that particular aspect of what I'm talking about, which is why they so often get labeled as degenerate, specifically the Spectra and Phantasm mechanics. It just, when the person on the other side of the table feels like they're not playing the game or that they can't play their game, it's another reason why hyper control decks end up getting labeled as degenerate, even though they're like stopping the degeneracy of the most aggro meta decks that are throwing 20 damage every single turn. It's like, wait, isn't this good because they're stopping that thing? And it's like, well, no, because they're stopping everybody from doing what they want to do. They're not playing the game. They're having to deal with all this bullshit. They don't get to play Flesh and Blood. They get to play Icelander.
Yeah, well put.
So I think like degenerate strategies are good for the game when they have abuse points. I think if Rune Chant stacking came back into the meta now, even if it was a strong deck, I think it'd be okay because there are like in-engine cards that can hate against it. There are fast strategies that can punish it. There's the lack of the true crazy abusive combos like the Skalata and Sonata Arcanix combo. And I think that counterplay, like you guys were saying, is a really important part that stops the degeneracy from being unfun. I think as long as there's ways that you can tune around it, it stays fun. And sometimes you might have to be a little bit creative to find them. But like, am I repeating myself?
No, I don't think you're repeating yourself at all, Fuzzy. You're saying that LSS, by injecting more agency through card pool, can allow what we might consider degenerate strategy to actually flourish and thrive.
Yeah.
One of the things that Joel was talking about in the way that illusionists build this board state of constantly permeating value and how debilitating that is and how frustrating that is to deal with, especially for certain heroes, which very much made them degenerate. Well, why didn't we throw Enigma into the same category? She does the same thing. That's a degenerate strategy, but by shifting some of the levers, Ward instead of Spectra, by adding more tools like more damage can't be prevented cards, more and more classes and heroes started to have the ability to stop that. And all of a sudden, it's not degenerate anymore.
Yeah. So to conclude my section, I think what makes a degenerate strategy is it perverts what you intend the cards to be used, or it perverts fundamental mechanics of the game and or abuses them. And I hope that we're all a little bit more open-minded in the future about fringe strategies popping up, because in my opinion, fringe strategies are exciting. I love to see a game played on the extremes and pushed to its limits, and fringe strategies literally do that. And I hope that you guys share some of that excitement, and I hope that I've maybe shifted your perspective a little bit, so that way when another degenerate strategy comes up, instead of rolling your eyes and wrapping up your mats and putting your cards back in your deck box, that you think about like, how can I come to the game in the future and adapt my strategies and come with a fresh perspective?
Well put.
What's next?
What's next? What's next is what follows after every single blue pitch, Fuzzy. Do you not understand how our podcast works? It's the Arsenal Zone!
Oh, the Arsenal Zone? Joel, what the heck is an Arsenal Zone?
I'm so glad you asked. I've been waiting all day to talk about this. So the Arsenal Zone, for those of you who've been living under a rock, is the part of the podcast where we talk about a card that we hate, a card that we love, a card that we love to hate. Either way, we're going to be talking about it now. And I think to start off, because the only one with something written, Clark, why don't you tell us about your card?
Well, I'm breaking the mold a little bit. I'm not talking about a card I love, or a card I hate, or a card I love to hate. I'm talking about a card I found when I pressed randomize me, Captain, on the LSS card database. I'm talking about Seeping Shadows. Seeping Shadows is a Shadow Runeblade action card from Monarch. It costs 3, and I can play it for my Banish Zone. The next attack action card with cost 2 or less I play this turn gains +1 power and Go Again. It has Go Again itself and Blood Debt and blocks for 2. So this is very much kind of a draft chaff kind of card. I think when we read it, we all sort of see the pain points of why this isn't very good. But this card did make me think of something interesting, which is it gets more playable the lower in pitch value it is. Because Seeping Shadows at blue, it doesn't like give -1 power. No, it scales off of the cost of the attack action card that you are targeting. A blue Seeping Shadows card can only target a 0 cost attack action, but it still gives it +1 and Go Again. So if you actually think about the value that you are generating at red, you are generating +1 and Go Again. On a red 3 cost, that is horrible value. But +1 and Go Again on a blue 3 cost, that's not so bad. But yeah, Seeping Shadows, cool. It gets more playable as it gets closer to blue. And I think that's weird and interesting.
I like the more avant-garde pitch scaling.
Yeah.
I have one, Joel, if you want me to go next.
Sure.
So I have a habit on this podcast, more of a rule, where I always sign and distribute the card that I shout out. And I try to avoid shouting out Majestics because I like to save them for guest episodes. But there's one that I really want to call out for being an absolute degenerate monster of a card.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think this card quite gets enough hate for how degenerate it is. And that's Lumina Ascension.
What?
Lumina Ascension is a very degenerate card. You play 3 of these and you deal like 40 fucking damage when you play like your swords.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's strong. It's definitely perverted and abusive.
What? So what the fuck? I record away and you guys just want to bully me across the Zoom call? What the hell?
He can't do anything about it.
Tell me this card is not stupid. Like when
Now
you play
I know
3
why
of
you
them on the
didn't write it
same
in the
fucking
notes.
turn. Like
Bruh.
attack with my weapons 3-4 times each, and they get like +3 each time. It's just a crazy combo that doesn't seem like it was made to be in the game, you know? I think it like is a hallmark of degenerate design. And it can be there in the game. Like I said, I just had a whole pitch where I talked about how much I love degenerate designs, and I love Luminous Ascension combo in the same way. But just like look me in the eye and tell me this isn't like a crazy degenerate like combo line.
Fine.
We talked about this when the Bolton deck came out. We talked about
it is a fine combo to exist in the game. It's degenerate. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
rolling scabbies every turn isn't good, Joel. Doesn't mean it's not degenerate.
You guys are you're really testing me.
Bro, he's gonna show up tomorrow to the armory and he's gonna fucking get us.
So anyway, I have a copy of Luminous Ascension for each of you that I'm going to sign and give to you so you can know my feelings on the card every time you play it.
Pervert the card with your signature, you fuck.
Exactly.
That's crazy. That's the craziest shit I've heard you say, Fuzzy. Wow. Okay,
I'm really surprised you disagree with me, honestly.
You talked about how Lumina combo, like, is it a healthy place for Bolton to be going in his design space?
You play it like one Lumina combo per turn, it's fine. You know, it's a very normal card.
Yeah, Raiden Lumina is fine.
But when you abuse it by playing 3 in the same turn,
on your Centauri Sabers?
insane.
I'm gonna move on. That's what I'm gonna do.
Move on to your own card.
Yeah.
Why don't you attack a card that Fuzzy loves?
I was thinking about it, but I'm above that. I'm above that. I'm better than Fuzzy. So for my card, I'm picking Arcanic Shockwave, and I'm picking this card for a few reasons. When Rosetta was like spoiled at Nats, Fuzzy and I were walking around the hall, and we were freaking out because as we were sitting down for a team sealed, they revealed the heroes. I was like, oh my fucking god, it's the all arcane set. And long story short, we get to the end of like the third day and we have to like leave. And I'm going to like redeem my prize tickets, and Arcanic Shockwave, the promo version, is like one of the prizes. I'm like, I don't know if any of the heroes will use this. I'll grab it anyways. And I'm here to report that they're probably not going to use this card. I don't think it fits with like any of the play patterns with Aurora. I could be wrong, but I don't even think I would really play Aurora if it did, because Aurora looks fucking lame. I don't know how often they want to be fusing in general. So I think with what they want to be doing with the elemental heroes, it might be steering away from the whole fusion stuff. So I hope that I can use it. If not, then whatever. I just wanted to talk about it. I thought it was interesting that they decided to make these promos, and now they're going to be unplayable. Anyways.
I love the shout out. It had the nice Joel twist of a little self-pessimism there. Self-deprecation.
Yeah.
Joel special.
I think that's the end of our episode. Thank you so much for potting with me, boys. This was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed this episode.
This was so fun.
Yeah. I think we were a little worried it was going to be a little too negative, but I think we struck a good balance.
We need to find more cards and more words in Flesh and Blood that don't actually have meaning, but yet like have so much meaning, you know?
Bro, that's going to give us so many episodes. Toxic.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah.
God, we got to do a whole episode on toxic strategy. Toxic's different from degenerate, guys.
We use that word a lot too.
All right.
Fair, I think that's balanced.
Fair and balanced. All right, I think that's all we have. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Join the Discord, like the video, share it with your friends. Actually, talk to people at your LGS that you listen to a podcast made by a couple of nerds in their or partner's house. Yeah, we love you all very much. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you. So long, farewell.
Until next time, guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Pitch It To Me podcast is hosted by Fuzzy Delp, Clark Moore, and Joel Recinos. Executive producer, Talon Stradley. Music by Dillon Hulse. Logo by Han V. Sound mixing, Christopher Moore. And last but not least, you. Thank you for listening. Please give us a follow on your favorite social media platform at Pitch It To Me podcast.
I think this card might be better than you're giving it credit for, but I understand why you're down on it. We can cut literally the entire fucking end of that. Like the moment that Clark starts talking, just fucking cut all of that shit.
Just end the episode.
Just end the episode right fucking there. Just right. Actually, I want you to jump to me saying, just cut everything I just fucking said. Just cut right to that.
That'd actually be really funny.
Just like a very obvious audio cut, like I start talking and then just immediately cut all that fucking shit.
Put a little record scratch in there. Yeah. Cut everything I just fucking said.
All right.